Wafa Alobaidat. You're listening to the Women Power Podcast, a subsidiary platform to the Women Power Summit, the largest event in MENA, with the aim of empowering women and helping them achieve their absolute highest potential. Each week on the Women Power Podcast, you will hear honest, vulnerable, authentic, real conversations from inspiring women. These women will share their experiences and stories into what it takes to build a successful business and career. The podcast will share insight and inspiration and hopefully inspire action and lead change. Okay, let's do this. This is the only episode where I'm going to be explaining or sharing the story of the concept behind the Women Power Podcast. I think it's really important to honor it by talking about why we're doing this. What are you going to expect from this season? Why is this podcast important? And why is it different from other podcasts? So these are some of the things I'm going to be talking about for the next, I want to say 45 minutes or so. I'm going to try to keep it nice and short. So I'm going to have to start at the very beginning when I was about 18 years old. And it's always been instilled in me to pursue entrepreneurship from my mom. Bless her heart. She always made it really clear to me when I was younger that being a business owner meant controlling my own destiny, meaning I could make choices and decisions and that I would have ultimate freedom. So this was drilled inside of me when I was just in high school. Please keep in mind that everyone in my family, and extended family, were in corporate jobs. Everywhere I looked, people were miserable. They were not happy. They were dreaming of retiring. It was really hard for me to find people that loved what they were doing and doing it for a living. And I remember approaching a friend's mother, and she was a classmate of mine and her mom had a couple of companies, and I just wanted to find out more about business. And it just seemed to me like the most natural thing to do is just kind of ask a bunch of questions. So when I went over to her house, I found her mom and I went to say hello. And then I asked if I could get some advice about fashion and marketing and how to start a business. And I just remember she was quite shocked and not very happy that I was, I guess, nosing around. Like, that's what it felt like. It just felt like I was out of my lane. And she said something along the lines of, this is really private and you shouldn't be asking these kind of questions. These are private matters. So I just remember how I felt from that experience. I felt like a door had closed, and it was wrong for me to ask these questions, and it was wrong for me to be curious. And that experience stayed with me. And I'm not sharing this because I'm, boo-hooing about it, but it was the start of me trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. And really, I was on the hunt for mentors. Looking back now, that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to find people to model behavior on. And after that, this was back when I was 17 years old. So a year later, I went to university. And every summer, my dad makes sure that I get a summer job. Like, that was his thing. Like, don't waste your time. You're not going to be staying in. So I was studying in London. And he's like, if you're going to be staying in London, you better get a job. So from a young age, my father was really big on work experience, which I'm so grateful for. And it was very important to him that by the time we graduated school and university, we would have had real life experience. And this definitely gave me an advantage in comparison to a lot of colleagues who started to build that after they've graduated. And I've made a lot of mistakes in my earlier experiences as an intern that I was able to not replicate when I actually was doing work that I enjoyed or work that I was getting paid to do. So this included working in a local newspaper or working with an interior design company. So my dad would pick up the phone and connect me, usually through his contacts with an organization, and get me an internship in the summer. And that was important to him that we do that every summer. And when I first went to study, he asked me to come back home to Bahrain so he could organize, continue on the ritual or the tradition of me getting this internship. And I told him that I would find that opportunity in London. And he didn't really care if it was paid or unpaid as long as I got that experience. So he was interested to see if I could actually get work. And it was important for me to get paid work. That was something I really wanted. I wanted to show that I had enough value to be paid. I wanted the extra money, who doesn't? And I wanted to actually make my own money, and be independent and feel independent. So finding a job with just internships is also not easy. So transitioning from internship to paid job was not easy to do. And in the past, as I said, my dad was a huge catalyst for making those opportunities happen. When in London, I had to build my own network. I had to learn how to email. So, email my CVs and customize my CV. So I became a champion expert at customizing those emails, and I started getting some callbacks for interviews. And I went to interviews for jobs that I didn't have the right skills for. So I made just a bunch of mistakes. And I went to jobs where I would not do well in the question. Like, I wouldn't do well during the actual interview, though on paper it looked like I would fit the organization I wanted to work in. I would sometimes be too eager, and sometimes I'd play hard to get. Like, I was just practicing, I guess, or I was understanding how these interviews work. And I honestly feel, looking back, that the more I went to these interviews, the better I got at them, because I was making a lot of mistakes and I was learning what didn't work. And I was actually getting some feedback from these interviews, like, you really shouldn't say that, or, if you had answered this way. And at some point I did start asking for feedback, like, how did you think I do? Do you have any feedback for me? And I just really wanted to learn. So I was on this quest for learning. I still sometimes feel I am, but I remember getting frustrated at some point and just picking up the phone and making a call to the last organization that I emailed my CV to. And it was this fashion designer called Liza Bruce. And though what I was studying at the time had nothing to do with the job roles I was applying to, I did get a call. I did get an answer, and the woman on the other end said, come for an interview tomorrow. And that was, again, a huge lesson for me. Learn to pick up the phone. You get so much more done when you pick up the phone versus sending those emails and just waiting. So I went to my interview the next day, and I found out that there was a stack of CVs on the very desk of the manager who was interviewing me for the job of a sales assistant for this brand. And she just said, I get these CVs every day, but I don't have time to filter, and you called, and we need somebody desperately. So I did get the job, and actually I'm quite grateful for the manager. Her name was Alessandra, and she was from Italy, and I'm so grateful for her, because she took a chance on me, and I had no previous paid job experience before that. And so I did get a job, and I really struggled to get a job. But once I did, I worked for this phenomenal woman called Liza Bruce. She had multiple stores around the world, but the store that I worked in was her main office in London. So she had the store and this back office with this team, and I was able to really learn the business ropes from her. Liza Bruce was a fantastic place for me to spread my wings. So Liza Bruce was a fashion designer. Her husband was an artist. They had stores around the world. Their main office was in London. And she sold everything from swimwear to kaftans to leisure wear, to sunglasses. And she really had a store or a brand that embodied her personality. And they were really big on traveling and collecting art and collecting jewelry and living in color. And that's the space that I first experienced, or the first brand that I was able to work with behind the scenes. And Liza at the time was probably in her late 40s, early 50s. She looked like an older version of Kate Moss, just beautiful, blonde pixie hair. And she was so muse-like in the way that she moved and spoke. And I just felt I was in the presence of these artists who at their very core were creative people and lived creatively and dressed creatively. And I remember having a conversation with her, was asking me about myself and where I was from. And I really told her what my intention was to learn. And she said, and I said something along the lines of, don't worry, Liza, I'm not going to steal your ideas. And I was terrified that she'd think that if she taught me anything, that I would replicate what she was doing. And again, this stems from my earlier experience having that conversation with my friend's mom. And she said, Wafa, give me your time and I'll teach you everything I know. Like, don't worry about stealing. Like, that was silly. Like, don't worry about that. Give me your time. I will teach you everything I know. That was a huge moment for me. That was the first time that door that I imagined closing had opened up. And true to her word, I gave it 100% of my time, my energy. I worked there weekends. I worked there evenings. I worked there during holidays. So I really was invested in my career. And I learned the ropes. I learned how to manage a business. I learned about money. I learned about fashion. I learned about marketing. I learned about press and PR. I worked with customers. I learned how to sell. I learned about window display. I've learned about presenting yourself. But mostly, I think what Liza taught me, which is something I truly value, was you can love what you do and do it for a living. And that was the most important lesson that I learned from her, watching her work and produce and create along with her husband, who was also her partner in the business. But that was the first time I felt like, this could be me. I could show up to work every day. I could show up whenever I wanted. I could create. I could do different things every day. And it's not a 9 to 5. It doesn't, it shouldn't feel like jail. And that's really where it all started for me. Everything I've built since then has been for that 17-year-old girl who asked questions. I've always been curious. I've always encouraged curiosity. And I think I've built a whole business based on that creative spirit. Whenever anybody gives me a call now, it's like my number one priority to stop what I'm doing and to serve that person. And I just keep going back to that 17-year-old girl, lost, confused, asking for directions, asking for help. And there was just nobody in that space that could help her. Obviously, this is pre-social media, so things have changed. And I think people now lead their lives being transparent, and there's so much great content out there, and there's so much around the idea of giving back and sharing and learning and growth, and there's an abundance of content. But back then, we were extremely limited and not as connected as we are today. This podcast is brought to you by O'Brien Hill. O'Brien Hill is a leading communications agency focusing on public relations, event management, and marketing. It's made up of a fantastic group of creatives in the design and PR fields. The agency first came to life in 2010 as my brainchild. Our creative consulting services were in demand in the UK after our online publication Sketchbook became an overnight success. Much like a proud mama, our agency's namesake is attributed to the place of its inception, Notting Hill. It's now 10 years later and we're one of the leading communication agencies in town, and we as a team are incredibly proud to be working on this very podcast behind the scenes. Check us out on www.obienhill.com. So let's talk about the Woman Power Summit. Let's fast forward to 2 years ago. I have been consuming a lot of information, a lot of content about gender equality. I was obsessed with Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In. I was eating up all her TED Talks and similar books that talked about women taking their power back, taking control of their destiny, about how women maneuvered through obstacles. And I was looking at the data, and the data was saying the same thing over and over again. The higher up you go and in positions of influence and power, there are far less women than there should be. So I am not by any means a gender equality expert. I just know that something is off about the formula, and you can feel it yourself. So when you look back at your own experiences, when you go to events, when you open the news or when you open the newspaper, like you start to notice something is not right about representation. It doesn't look right. And this is not just like a personal thing. I think this is more like a global awareness about the subject matter. So I really wanted to attend one of these conferences. There was a conference in Australia, there was a conference in the US that all circled around connecting and empowering women and building all these women tribes around challenges and obstacles that women were facing and how women were persevering and getting to these spaces of influence and how they got there. And I found a experience or a conference I wanted to attend in the US. The tickets have sold out though by the time I wanted to attend, and I just felt frustrated. I have such a demanding job and I just couldn't see how I could pull myself away to go to the West Coast on this trip for a few days and get to do this experience. And the ticket was crazy expensive as well, and I just was so on the fence about going and how am I meant to go if it's sold out. So I did some research and I found that we had nothing similar to those kind of spaces or platforms in this part of the world. So my intention was to really recreate my intention really was to build a program that resonated with ambitious women. And the idea was to connect and empower women by providing them this platform or this experience for them to learn from each other, learn from shared experience only. Having been to so many events, I knew what I wanted to do. I knew what I didn't want to do. I was so sick of events that were so protocol based and formal and rigid that people you'd hardly learn anything because everybody was reading from a piece of paper. And I wanted to go to an event where women were real and stories were real and people were raw and they talked about how they persevered. And I wanted to feel inspired and I just wanted to feel something at one of those events. So I went about to build this proposal along with my team at the agency. So that's actually my full-time job. I run a firm that's focused on public relations and communications. And I went to my team and I said, guys, this is what we should be doing. We should basically build this massive, amazing conference. Let's make this the biggest convention for women leaders. Let's build this for women like us who want to learn, who want to grow, who want to make mistakes. And let's get all these like-minded women together into one place. And let's be selfish and like figure out who we want to see and meet and bring to this event. And that's how it kickstarted. And I really needed my team's buy-in because I was basically asking them to get a part-time job on top of their full-time job to put this conference on with me. So that's what we started to do. With our proposal and our pitch, we approached more than 100 companies over a period of months, and we wanted buy-in from corporate partners and sponsors, and we were on the hunt to find like-minded people. And what was really interesting going to these meetings was the decision maker was always a man, but the buy-in would always be from the women that attended those meetings because they would be nodding and they would be smiling and they would be excited by the prospect of this event. And I felt that we got the support from those middle managers, from, the women in HR and marketing, and they were the ones that were like, these are shared values between our organizations and this event, and we are on board. So we got really pumped, and it really wasn't easy. There were a lot of companies that dismissed us, or they just were like kind of proud, but wanted to watch us from the outskirts and just see what we would do. And we were making all these promises. We were saying we're going to put on the biggest event in the region. We were going to bring 100+ speakers. There's nothing like it. And we're going to have community engagement and a regional audience. And I think a lot of people were skeptical because though we manage events as part of our organization, we have never put on something on the scale. And the way we designed the summit was there were multiple tiers or multiple verticals or different things happening at the same time. And you had options. And that was so important to me to integrate into this program because I usually would attend an event, I would attend one session and leave and just go on about my day. Or I would go for the opening, as a lot of people would do, where there would be an official there who would be the patron. So everybody would hear the speech and then maybe wait for lunch and then go home or go back to work. So I wanted options. I wanted people to just be so stuck not being able to make a decision on which session to attend because they were all good. So that was a huge intention. We wanted to create options. We also wanted this event to be personal, formal free, marketing, like direct marketing free. We just wanted to strip it of all the conventional things that we see at events, and we wanted to create a cool space that was disruptive, even to how events were done by standards in our country. And it was crazy. We had really high standards. We were branding Nazis. We wanted everything to look good, and we wanted to also create all these activations. So we had tech pitches happening at the same time. We organized mentorship opportunities between our speakers and people who were attending. We had consultants come, business consultants from KPMG, and they would give free advice to startups and SMEs. And we brought in all these stakeholders to one place, and it was magical. We made a lot of mistakes. We underestimated this massive flow of having 2,000 plus women attend for registration, and we fixed that in the second year. So this is back in 2018. We ran out of food. And we had a lot of walk-ins because we kept the registration open even on the day for people who were coming from out of Bahrain to get tickets. And we had to scramble and call one of our clients, and we ordered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sandwiches that came right after lunch. So we were, and then we over-ordered the next day. So it was wild. And I will never forget walking into the space and seeing the sea of women that were attending sessions and connecting and talking to each other. And it was marvelous. It was honestly a dream, because it was exactly how I had pictured an event like this to be. I remember going to get a coffee at some point, and on my left, I would hear these women talk about partnering up to do a book. And then on my left, I'd hear somebody saying they need a social media person to help them with their account. And then someone saying, I can do it. And I looked around me, and people were connecting with each other. They were finding jobs. They were finding mentors. I found somebody running to one of the speakers and tapping her on the shoulder and just giving her a hug and wanting to meet her. I guess she was inspired or in awe by her. So it was absolutely wonderful. And a lot of the speakers that were there who were from Bahrain, we've probably heard from before, but the way that we designed it, so the tone of it was really raw. So it was, our ground rules were experience only, don't preach, just talk about your experiences. We want stories. We want real things that we can learn from. We also managed to get 60 companies to pledge to initiatives to empower women, and they had a year to kind of activate that and then report back to us when they've completed or they've finished their pledges. So there were so many things happening at the same time. It was an event like none other. And we were definitely burnt out afterwards. I think we all needed some time to reset and go back to our work. And then we promised to do this for 3 years in a row. So true to our word, we did it again in 2019. And we changed the location, but it was as awesome as the first one. And similarly to the first one, we had a whole we had all these pre-events that happened before the main event. We had the largest run for women in the country. We had a cycling event where women could ride together in a group. We partnered up with amazing organizations to make that happen. And it was just a fully blown event. We had all these ambassador dinners beforehand. So all these influencers graciously shared our event and our mission with their followers. So there was a lot of momentum online as well. And this year we I mean, now we're living in mad times, and it just feels to me that the natural thing to do would be to pivot our experience into this podcast. We've been talking about having a podcast for the last 6 months or so, and I think we were gearing up to launch this anyways, especially coming up to this year's event. But due to all these circumstances, we will continue on our mission to empower women, to share stories, to connect women with each other, and to provide all these tools, these inspirational tools for women to overcome any challenges they're facing in their career, in their business, or their personal life, to be their best self and to fulfill their largest potential. And I think that's what we are aiming to do. This platform will continue to have the same ground rules. So protocol free, formal free, let's get raw, let's get personal. Let's talk about some of the subjects that we don't get to talk about or we don't get to hear from on the mainstream media or in the mainstream media. So that's basically the story of the Women Power Summit, which has kind of segued us into the Women Power podcast. And every week we will be hearing different women. Some of them are the speakers themselves who spoke on our very large platform, who have made such an impact on our attendees that we're going to bring them back and we're going to continue the conversation and hopefully inspire action and lead change. And that's definitely our goal and will continue to be our goal. This podcast is brought to you by the Women Power Summit. The Women Power Summit is an annual event that hosts more than 2,000 guests to listen, learn, and network with more than 100 plus speakers and industry leaders. The summit creates space for growth, learning, discussion, and collaboration, with the means of creating a space where women can support each other, ask questions, be curious, and be inspired. So we went back and forth about the name, the Woman Power Podcast, and that name can scare some people. I know that when we started using it, it felt like it was a revolution. We were putting the power next to the word women, and it was looking back now, that was pretty fearless of us to do that. And we were unapologetic about and quite comfortable with women having power and having influence. And that was always our goal, is just to be okay with that and to be comfortable with that and to make that conversation happen. And in the last year, when we were pondering this podcast, I was like, should we keep the word power in there? Should we soften it up to something else, like use an adjective, or like, do we need to include the word power? Isn't that aggressive? Voices in the day that give them personal wins. That's power. It's when you're having a bad day and you decide, you know what, I'm going to go for a walk or a run or do some yoga, or I'm going to call a friend, and then you are able to turn that day around. That's power right there. It's when you're in a tough relationship and you want to get out and making tough decisions to ensure that you are living your best life. That's power. So to me, I'm not looking at it as hard power, but also soft power. And I think we need to be less apologetic about that word and the brand's name. And not to say that we are apologetic, but I think that we need to be okay with having the word power there, and we need to be comfortable. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast episode. This is the introduction episode, and I do hope you join us for the incredible range of interviews we're going to be posting. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening to an episode of the Women Power Podcast. And thank you for downloading and streaming our podcast every week. If you love what you've heard, tag us on Instagram and follow the Women Power Podcast and Women Power Summit account for more information on our next episode. Please leave a rating review wherever you get your podcast. It really helps other women discover the show. That's it from me. See you next week.